Our next talk is entitled An Evaluation of Periodic Developmental Reviews Using Natural Language Processing.
Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dominic Rudakevych. I'm an undergraduate researcher at West Point, and I'll be talking through my PDR evaluation using natural language processing. So just the objectives for this research, we'll be focusing on the second question here. We can learn more about the first question at my poster session tonight. But we're looking at if there's evidence of copy and pasting within the periodic developmental reviews at West Point. So getting into what a periodic developmental review is, West Point is very focused on developing character within our cadets, and the PDR is a method by which the Academy evaluates how character development is going. So this is an example of PDR, and we see the boxes in red are highlighting the areas of interest for this study. So the top left is who wrote that. Whether it be a self-reflective PDR, an instructor, a peer PDR, or a subordinate. We then have an optional written statement at the bottom left corner here, and our response variable of the overall rating of that cadet, whether it be most qualified, highly qualified, qualified, or not qualified. And just some background, West Point is constantly reviewing its systems in place. The Institutional Effectiveness Office is reviewing PDRs and has been since the 90s. This offers a new analytical approach to how we're evaluating these systems. Just some inspiration for why we're looking at this. This slide and the following slide give an example of two PDRs selected from our data set. Cadet Blank is an excellent cadet. He works hard and possesses tremendous potential. A pretty good overall written statement with an overall rating of 3, highly qualified. When we look at the following example, very similar language. All we can see here is the differences are these bolded words, the pronouns, with an overall rating of 4. And this inspires, if the whole data set is reflective of this and we trained a model on this, it would be training on those pronouns, and there'd be an issue with the overall rating system. There'd be something going on. Getting into the data, our data is from 2018 and 2019. We have about 38,000 PDRs, 10,000 of which had this optional written statement. Here's a summary of the variables that we used for this study. A quick exploration. These are the 4 writers that can write and a distribution of their overall scores. And we see there's a pretty big difference between categories, which is more inspiration for why we're doing this research. Getting into the methods, the embeddings that we used were created using Word2Vec, which is a bit of an antique language modeling representation compared to BERT. It's 2013, 2014. And basically it's a neural network system where the vectors that are produced for each written statement are the weights in that neural network. This comes in 2 flavors, 2 architectures. Continuous bag of words, or SIBO, takes the context around a word and uses this context to predict what word is going to be centered, whereas skipgram takes that centered word and builds out probabilities around that context. So once we created vectors for these text representations, we cosine similarity to compare vectors. Cosine similarity is really simple. It's just taking the dot product of 2 vectors and dividing by their magnitude. And it gives you how aligned those vectors are. And in the context of language processing and text analysis, this tells us how similar those text documents are. For the question 2, we used an ordinal logistic regression. Come to my poster session later. So for the cosine similarity analysis, this top PDR written statement, we see it color-coded by kind of text areas, and listed below are the most similar PDRs in our data set with their associated cosine similarity. And we can see that these top 2 ones have a 98.8% similarity, and they do show that evidence of copy and pasting, right? A couple words changed here and there. Whereas when we get down to 87% cosine similarity, similar sentiment in the written statement, but not necessarily copy and pasting. And from this, we decided our threshold for what we're going to consider copy and pasting to be about 90%, which is generous. So from this, we build out a similarity ratio. That's the number of document pairs, so PDR pairs that have over this threshold of 90%, divided by the total number of PDR pairs. Since we had 10,000 PDRs with written data, that's about 100 million pairs, which took really long to calculate. And only about 200,000 had over that 90% threshold. So only about 0.2% of PDRs were copy and pasted, giving this 90% threshold, suggesting that it's not a systematic issue at West Point. Good practice, do some sensitivity analysis on relatively arbitrary thresholds that we set. So 90%, when we adjust this either way, it stays about similar until 85%, but we saw 87% doesn't really suggest copy and pasting, so we're good there. Here is the results of the ordinal logistic regression. We can see that certain facets do actually predict. We can talk more about this in my poster session. Summary, so no significant evidence of copy and pasting as a overall issue at West Point. It's still definitely evident, but it's not a systematic problem. And PDR writer and overall sentiment did provide strong insight to the overall score. Again, poster session. And recommendations we drew from this for the Academy was to standardize scoring expectations across these populations of writers and to require this written statement, since this does provide enriched feedback for the cadets and they're not just copy and pasting for the most part. Any questions? Concludes my presentation.